But in terms of Parliament's internal working, so yesterday, the Speaker set up a 7-member committee to just look into this tape flying around concerning the IGP and all of that. So we wait to see what they will do. But the other bit has to do with a key part of Parliament's internal workings, Richard. The Standing Orders Committee. There's a report of the Standing Orders Committee on the review of the standing orders of the Parliament of Ghana. So essentially, Richard, so what are the standing orders for those who do not quite understand what all this means and what's going on there?
So standing orders are basically the rules with which Parliament works.
Okay.
Beyond the Constitution and other laws that govern how things generally run. In Parliament, these rules, these laws are supported by the internal rules of Parliament, which guide procedure as to how you can, file a statement, when and how that statement can be read, issues having to do with questions, ministers coming to the House to answer questions, how appointments, are made by the president prior, with prior approval from Parliament and all of that. The standing orders basically provide a superstructure on how Parliament should do its work generally. Just as you have the rules of court, how the courts do their work. When you are to file, a process, how you do it, if you are required to make a response to the processes filed against you, how you do it, the time frame within which you do it, and all of that. So basically, that's a brief description of what the standing orders are.
I see. So this report, as we see it, is why was it that to review what had been done, or to review the standing orders and what prescribe better ways of workings or better ways of getting Parliament to function?
Yeah, so for a long time, there have been concerns about suspected gaps or admitted gaps in the standing orders. That, yes, the country has moved on, the practice of democracy has developed. This is our longest ever democracy under a Republican administration or, constitution. And therefore, in order to deepen democracy, which of course is normally led by Parliament, because that is where discussions take place. That's the public square of the Republic of Ghana, to put it that way. Some people take the view that we need to actually refine the rules so as to provide for situations which we did not initially think of when we were crafting the rules in the immediate aftermath of the coming to force of the 1992 Constitution.
Okay.
And then subsequent reviews that were done in the early 2000s, if my memory serves me correctly, somewhere in 2001, thereabout. So there have always been agitations that let's tweak the rules. And then also where there would appear to be lacuna or gaps, let's try and seal those gaps. So this committee has been working on how to reform the rules and provide for these things, and they presented their report to the House and decisions taken.
I see. Very interesting list. So the a key part of what they did was the realignment of committees. We do know that Parliament functions heavily on the small committees that come together to really prop up the work of Parliament. Because away from the discussions on the floor, there are committees that actually look deeper into all the things that come to the floor, or critical matters of national interest. So really that's what the committees do. Now, there are 12 of them as we know. 13 of them as we know. And then they have been realigned.
Well, the committees generally are more than that.
They are more than that, okay.
Yeah, we have standing committees and we have, standing committees and select committees.
Okay.
But what has happened generally is to deconstruct some of the committees and look at the specific elements of these committees and see if it is possible to hive off specific functions and give it to a new committee which would do the work, because there's a view that, for instance, the Committee on Finance deals with everything that the budget has to do with and all of that. Of course, there's a committee that deals specifically with allocations like that of the Electoral Commission and some constitutional bodies, But there's the view that why give the Finance Committee so much power? There are matters that require specific expertise. So, for instance, if it has to do with a budgetary allocation, which is related to matters having to do with health, and the matter is squarely within the competence of the Committee of Health, why then should it be merely because it's a budgetary allocation or matters having to do with the budget? Let's confine that to the Ministry of the Committee on Finance. So there have been attempts made to strip away some of the powers currently vested in existing committees and vest those in new committees that have been set up, or realign committees, as to give greater efficiency to what happens in Parliament.
I see. So the committees, like you said, they had been realigned. So there's the report states a list or a certain number of committees, okay, that have been realigned, and new committees have been introduced per the report. So there were 13 of them that were realigned. 13 committees that were realigned. Some of them we do know of because we hear from them or hear of them in the news. And then there are new committees that have been created as a consequence. So if you go through the list, like I said, there are 13 realigned committees. So Committee on Gender, Children and Social Welfare, Committee on Lands and Natural Resources, Committee on Information and Communications, Committee on Employment, Labor Relations and Pensions, Committee on Trade, Industry, Tourism, Committee on Youth and Sports, Committee on Energy and Petroleum, Committee on Roads and Transportation. We hear of them quite a lot. Committee of Privileges and Immunities. We also hear of them. The Appointments Committee, which I can say probably is the most popular, because you have a lot of ministers facing that committee for their vetting and all.
Judges and all of that.
Judges and all. Committee of the Whole, that I did not know of. Committee on Government and Parliamentary Assurances, and Committee on Chieftaincy, Culture and Religious Affairs.
So the new committees that have been formed as a result, the Committee on Economy and Development Planning. Economy and Development Planning. For some time we've had ministry responsible for finance and economic planning. This one is dealing with the Committee on the Economy. So there's a committee specifically dealing with matters of the economy. Generally, we had the term Committee on Finance, which deals with the economy and all kinds of things. So there's a committee now which is to come into force, dealing with the economy and development planning generally. How are we developing? Are we working with the reports of the National Development Planning Commission? Is there consistency in terms of how government is supposed to do its work, so that new government comes in and they are doing their own thing without regard to what exactly the general framework of development must look like?
Okay.
Then the Committee on Security and Intelligence. There's also a Committee on Parliamentary Affairs, Committee on Human Rights. This has been a big issue. We saw what happened in Ashaiman, how the soldiers went there misbehaved. As we speak, there appears to be no one so far called to account for the misconduct of the military. Again, we saw what happened in the northern part of the country. I think it was in Wa, if my memory serves me correctly, when the soldiers would run into that community and brutalize, quite a number of people. The chiefs had to get up and say, no, we were not going to allow this. So the military must account. And then some, punishment meted out by the military because of that.
Okay.
Currently, you have the Committee on Defense and Interior dealing with these matters. But what appears to be a clear move now is to ensure that there's a Committee on Human Rights, and it is an important committee in a democracy like this, to ensure that they are holding executive and in some cases judicial actions and the activities of individuals and companies in the country. They can deal with matters of abuses of rights. Of course, when the Shroud produces its report, you would expect that the committee will be looking at some of these things and ensuring that the right things are done. If you remember recently, former President John Mahama said something about what he would do in his new term, which is to ensure that there is the production of periodic reports on how Ghana is doing with human rights.
Okay.
Human rights has become a big issue
Yeah,
globally.
it is.
And if we do not have an institution carefully monitoring these things and producing reports, that's why I am happy with what he is proposing, that there should be a way of monitoring and to be sure of what Ghana is doing and not doing, so that our marks internationally, and also we can deepen human rights in Ghana. Then you also have the budget committee. Hitherto, as I was saying, you have the finance committee dealing with almost everything, sometimes including matters having to do with energy, because they are matters of. So what they sometimes do is to merge two committees into one to deal with a particular matter. Now you have a budget committee dealing with matters of budget and related issues. Then you also have the Committee on Sanitation and Water Resources. This is also another big matter, a big agenda within the framework of the UN and all these development institutions. Also locally, look at the state of Accra. The President of the Republic had told us that, within a certain period of time, he was going to ensure that Accra became what? The cleanest city in the whole of Africa, he promised. Well, we all can see the state of Accra. And it would seem that that promise has not been delivered. Now, which institution should ordinarily be dealing with this matter in Parliament? Previously, you have the Committee on Works and Housing. You understand? So they were dealing with all of these things generally. Now, the responsibility for sanitation and all of that will be dealt with by the Committee on Sanitation and Water Resources. And water is a big deal in many parts of this country. You go, people are drinking from terrible sources. They're drinking from the same source as animals. And people get all kinds of infections and diseases as a result of that. So proper oversight, we hope, will be provided by the Committee on Sanitation and Water Resources. Then you have Committee on Public Administration and State Interests. That at that level too, there have been some realignments at the executive level. SIGA and the things they do, making sure that where we have put our money into state businesses to run in a certain way, someone is monitoring and ensuring that those things are properly run. Just yesterday, we were talking about 17 or so state assets or businesses which have been run down and which we say we want to sell off because they have become a drain on the national purse. You would expect a committee like this to be looking into what these people are doing and to ensure that there is greater accountability as opposed to what happens presently. What I would say quickly in respect of that is that we should discourage the continuous culture of members of parliament sitting on some of these boards.
Okay.
Of course, I appreciate that the standing orders and the constitution say that when it comes to a matter in which a member has a vested interest, that member should not participate in the proceedings of the committee or to a large extent what happens at the plenary. But my difficulty is with the current numbers that we have, assuming a serious matter comes up, which is to be decided, do you really foresee some MP saying that he will not sit on the matter because he sits on the board of this committee or on that body? I don't think that it makes any democratic sense that we have MPs being, appointed to serve on committees of state institutions when they have oversight role to ensure that these institutions do well. There is some issue of conflict of interest there. I know I'm pouring sand in a lot of sand in the gallery of maybe. but look, if we want to practice democracy, I think there are issues of conflict of interest in those areas. And then you have the petitions committee. Currently, the framework or the superstructure is not properly defined. So when you, Nathan, for instance, take a petition to Parliament, maybe you were not happy with the comments that were made or on the tape that everybody is talking about. And then you decide that, okay, you are writing a petition to the Speaker of Parliament to deal with this matter. The question is, how should the Speaker receive the petition? How should it be announced on the floor? What should happen after its announcement on the floor? Refer to which committee to be dealt with in which way? Lacuna. appears to have been, the headache in this particular area, and for some reason, the committees didn't deal with it properly in the past, and a new committee has now been properly put together to deal with matters of petition. There's also the Committee on Independent Constitutional Bodies. You know that there are a number of institutions created by the Constitution.
Okay.
The judiciary is a creation of the Constitution. Acts have been passed to give effect to that.
Mm-hmm.
You also have, the Electoral Commission. It is a creation of the Constitution. You have the Shraj, a creation of the Constitution. These constitutional bodies generally are supposed to be independent.
Yeah.
And there should not be any interference in the work. But we have heard consistently attempts being made by members of the executive or some other institutions to interfere in how they do their work. We would expect that the coming into force of this Committee on Independent Constitutional Bodies, would provide that institution with some force to be able to rebuff, attempts to actually compromise these institutions. Sometimes the attempts to compromise come in the form of, efforts to withhold budgetary allocations to them. So let's say, for instance, the Electoral Commission is granted 10 billion Ghana cedis to work with towards 2024 elections. And for some reason, someone somewhere decides that, look, I'm not going to release all 10 billion Ghana cedis. I'm going to stifle their work. So I'm going to release only three billion Ghana cedis. Of course, there should be an institution in Parliament that is monitoring what is happening to ensure that they are able to receive their funds, and when they do, they are able to account for how they use the resources of this country.
Okay.
Then you have Committee on Post-Legislative Scrutiny. So when the laws are passed, or regulations are passed, or policy documents are passed, what should happen therefrom? How can we monitor and ensure that the people who are enforcing the laws are giving appropriate effect to the laws in a way that represents the true legislative intent of Parliament. Okay. So when Parliament passes a law, there is always a reason behind the passage of the law. In the enforcement of the law, can we say that the people are doing the right thing? And can we monitor and ensure that, okay, are there further defects in the law so that we can, cure them going forward?
Okay.
I would expect that some of these things will come within their work. And then Committee on Bills. Bills are basically the documents that eventually mature into law when they are passed by Parliament and assented to by the President. For instance, the Bekwi Bill. Previously when it was passed, Ezra Man went to the Supreme Court and argued that Article 106 of the Constitution was undermined because Parliament did not do the proper things within the framework of Article 106. There was no debate, gazetting, and all of that. The Supreme Court agreed and said, hey, the Constitution required you to do A, B, C, D. You failed to do that, and therefore we are killing that section 43 of the Narcotics Act, and it was thrown out. Parliament has gone back, hopefully, and they have done the right thing. And I hope that maybe there is no issue, going forward. So matters of bills in Parliament, the committee hopefully will be dealing with those in a more efficient way. Then you have ethics and standards.
Ethics and standards.
Yeah. Many MPs just talk anyhow because they assume that anything goes. They conduct themselves, some MPs, in a way that is reprehensible. You have heard MPs say all kinds of outlandish things in the name of politics. You have some MPs,
done some outlandish things.
We remember the case of the Honorable Amoateng. We have people getting involved in all kinds of business deals that undermine their own independence and authority as members of Parliament. It is the expectation of everybody that the work of this committee would bring some of these issues to the limelight. If an MP misbehaves, or someone else, a minister, or people act in a way that does not align with what the standards should be, what is expected of a member of Parliament, a serving member of Parliament, something like that should be invoked properly
Okay.
to deal with it. Of course, we also do know that there is also the Privileges Committee, which also deals with, consequences of actions like that. We know is the Canadian Chapel matter, has it been decided? Or maybe it's not been decided. I don't know. I've forgotten as to. Then you also have the Committee on Ways and Means, and then the Committee on
the name evokes all kinds.
Let me go to the
Very
report of the
interesting.
committee, if I may, just to highlight the one on Ways and Means, which Godfrey seems to be so. Generally, what is Ways and Means, Godfrey?
Generally, ways and means operations. Operations.
We understand ways and means in a different dimension.
Well, how do you understand? I'm trying to.
But that's what
Yeah,
the
the way,
operations. All the things you do to make sure that you get a particular result.
You see, so this one is going to be the boss. So where is that? Forgive me, I'm trying to get the Committee on Ways and Means, which is on page 20 of the report, and it says that a new committee proposed is the Ways and Means Committee. This proposal is against the backdrop that increasingly the work of committees have become more critical and needs to be better resourced, monitored, and enhanced to achieve the ends provided for in the 1992 Constitution. Now, this committee is responsible for monitoring the activities of all parliamentary committees, so more like the boss, and apportioning funds from money allocated for carrying out programs approved in the budget of the respective committees. Now, it will also be mandated to deliberate on administrative matters relating to the committees as part of the approval process by the Speaker. Now, the committee is empowered to receive quarterly reports from committees and to report to the House from time to time on their respective programs and activities. The committee would also carry out periodic studies on matters relating to the effectiveness and improvement of the committees of the House. So basically, they become the umbrella body looking at what the respective committees are doing, where they are going wrong. Recommendations will be made as to how we can make them more efficient in terms of funding issues. For instance, one of the committees that has been crying in the past is the Committee on Government Assurances.
Okay.
So when ministers go to make promises that will build 21 hospitals or will build 21 markets or will build fishing landing sites for fisher folk, and they provide timelines, the expectation normally was that this Government Assurances Committee will move in and scrutinize these and be sure that the ministers do not, breach the timelines. Or where they breach them, there should be compelling reasons as to why they did not act within the timelines. So they hold the government's feet to the fire of accountability. This committee has not been as effective as it used to be in the past. We would expect that the Committee on Ways and Means will be monitoring and ensuring that when monies are allocated, they are properly used. And in cases where, for instance, the Government Assurances Committee is not given money, as we saw in the past, to do its work, which they've been crying, their work is done. And then again, the Public Accounts Committee.
Yes.
A lot of the time, they have had to rely on external support. Donors have had to come in to provide funding. If you remember Salas Mentor's time, former member of parliament, when he was the chairman of that committee, a lot of attempts were reportedly made to frustrate his work because the government thought, we were told at the time, that his work was undermining the integrity or the standing of the government in the eyes of people. So a lot of work was done allegedly by the government to undermine his authority and the work of the committee. So donors had to move in to ensure that funding was provided to get the work of the committee going. And the committee became really popular. In fact, it is that credibility that the likes of the Honorable Dr. Kluchia Veji are relying on. The Honorable Kandapa relied on in the past to do their work. And we hope that the Ways and Means Committee will do its work and ensure that the right things are done.
Okay. And the final one is the Committee on Private Members' Bills and Motions. We've seen we've seen the rise in private members' bills. We've seen a few of them getting into the public domain. So I think that committee is self-explanatory, really. Jones Adepoinla says, Sky, thank you for the insightful information on the works of Parliament. Some of these things are not well explained by the politicians because they want to confuse and rule you. For sure. Richard Alaska is still here with me. So, Richard, we've been going through, like we said, the report on the standing orders, and you've gone through the old committees, and you've gone through the realigned committees. I don't know whether you have other bits of info to share with us.
So, for instance, you know that we've had an issue with how MPs attend Parliament, how their attendance is recorded. In some cases, in the past, we've had situations where MPs just go write their name in the register at the mailroom and then they gone.
they don't stay for the work
to do the work, and they go and do other things. Sometimes they argue they are in committee meetings and all of that. And then some of these things come up when issues come up as to whether the constitutional requirement that certain numbers be present in Parliament.
Yes.
The reason why I went to court regarding the budget approval and disapproval, and then also Justice Abdullah also went to court. You know, some of these matters have been taken on board by the report of the committee. For instance, on attendance of members of Parliament, the committee report says taking into cognizance of the, or taking cognizance, what was the word? Taking cognizance of the, frequent concerns raised by members in respect of records of attendance in the votes and proceedings. The committee recommends the adoption of the signing of an attendance register in the chamber by manual or electronic means.
Okay.
The signed register of attendance is expected to be evidence of attendance of a member in the chamber. Now, this, the committee hopes, would address the concerns associated with attendance of members as recorded in the votes and proceeding. You have someone.
Yeah, let's speak to Dr. Rashid Draman. He's Executive Director of the African Center for Parliamentary Affairs. We'll get his thoughts on, on these reforms that Parliament wants to enact to see how it will lead to the benefit of its own operations. Dr. Draman, good morning, and many thanks for joining us on the Citi Breakfast Show.
Good morning.
Great. Your initial thoughts on these reforms that Parliament wants to put in place? It's looking at some of its committees. It wants to realign some of them. And, what do you make of this step taken by the August House of Parliament?
Well, let me say this has been very, very long overdue. The reforms, the kind of review of the standing orders started more than 10 years ago. Parliament after Parliament tried, and then, I don't know, sometimes not able to wield enough political capital, the initiative dies. Even after a lot of investments, because I remember our center invested a lot of money. Ghana did same. Before then, I remember CDD and so on. So first, I must commend the leadership of Parliament for making sure that this time around, at least, this thing is coming to fruition. We have come a long way. Since the 30 years of parliamentary democracy. The world of parliaments, the world of democracy has evolved significantly. But our country, we have been static in terms of the rules and procedures that we use to govern our parliamentary proceedings, and they are called standing orders because of their dynamic nature. So in every country, every now and then, the orders are reviewed just to take into account the realities and so on and so forth. So, in terms of these reforms, I strongly believe that they will go a very long way in enhancing our democracy. The committees, first of all, are going to be reduced in size, which I think is a very good thing, because best practice tells us that when a committee is too big, it becomes a little bit unwieldy, and we expect most parliamentary committees to work on the basis of consensus, so that they will argue and discuss on the basis of their technical competence. But you come to our country, some parliamentary committees are close to 31 and so on. You go to the UK, for instance, their parliament, the size of the parliament is almost maybe 3 times the size of our parliament. You take their public accounts committee, for instance, it's less than 20 members. You come to our space, our public accounts committee is about 25 members. So is the appointments committee and so on. So I think that's the first kind of good thing. The second is the fact that, a number of committees, almost all committees in our parliament are chaired by the ruling party except the Public Accounts Committee. And when we talk about our democracy here and we assess parliamentary committees, the one that comes to everybody's mind in terms of performance is the Public Accounts Committee, and it's mainly because it's chaired by the opposition. So we had the likes of Honorable Kandapa, Honorable Salas Mensah, and so on, and now Honorable Abiji chairing the Public Accounts Committee. So we have been calling over the years for, most of these oversight committees to be given to the parties that are not in power, because oversight, even though the responsibility of an entire parliament, practically we've seen in different parliaments, including our own, that when it comes to holding the government to account, it becomes a business of the opposition. So that is why if you have the opposition chairing some of these oversight committees, it becomes a very good thing. In the East African countries of Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and so on, most oversight committees are chaired by the opposition. So that's why I find this initiative a laudable one. Then we also have the budget committee. Previously every matter, budget and so on, finance is just handled by the finance committee. And in some countries, this is not the case. They have what is called the Parliamentary Budget Office and a budget committee, which deals specifically with issues of budget, and then the rest of finance issues are dealt with the finance committee. So I've seen, in these new reforms, some kind of decentralization of the financial matters of our republic. Because there are, I think, apart from the budget committee, there are other committees that would deal with finance besides the finance committee, which is a good thing. The other thing is we've seen also the introduction of a day or an hour or hours for backbenchers. Because, if you remember, most people complain, we send people to parliament, we never hear their voices and so on and so forth.
Yes.
And most of these are backbenchers. Usually, the opportunity is given to the leadership to make statements and so on. And sometimes, those who are sitting at the back, they never get the opportunity, even if they want to.
Mm.
So I think there is an introduction of that. Then we also have the kind of private members' bills, which started during the 7th Parliament under Right Honourable Michael Quay.
Okay.
Now I think the frontiers are going to be expanded so that at least we can get more private members' bills and so on and so forth. And then we also have, the introduction of a committee on post-legislative scrutiny, which means that, the laws that have been passed in this country, every now and then the committee will look at these laws and see whether they are really responding to the gaps that they were supposed to fill. In most countries these days, these are done so that if the law is not really, up to date or a lot has happened, then those revisions are made. So I think all in all, the reforms are quite far-reaching, and I believe they would enhance, our democratic practice. And then one thing that I forgot is the fact that now I think most governance institutions in our country are going to have to come before Parliament, at least to account for their stewardship, even if it is just maybe accounting for how they use resources that were appropriated to them by Parliament.
Okay.
It's only government ministers who show up before, and we know the tussle, for instance, in this country when Parliament wants even the EC, for instance, to come before it to answer certain questions. It's not in their standing orders. But now I think they want to make sure that there is some clarity and there are some kind of procedures and structures in place to make sure that all these things happen. We would have loved to see, a lot of the oversight committees, just beyond the appointments committee chaired by the opposition. But if you read the reforms, I think some of those committees are now left to the discretion of Parliament to apportion on the basis of numerical strength in the House, which is, I think one limitation that I have seen. The second one is the fact that, I took part in some of the kind of work that came up to this point.
Okay.
And one of the suggestions that I made was for our Parliament to, in the new standing orders, to have what is called the Committee of the Future.
The Committee of the Future.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
Because in some parliaments we have that. So, for instance, in the Parliament of Finland, we used to go to Finland every year. We had a collaboration with the Parliament, and I have gone there with many, many MPs from our country, including, people like Honorable Kandapa and others. We've had programs there. Just to learn, to see how a small country like that, has managed, to achieve the level of development that it has. And one of the committees that, they have, which is amazing, is a Committee of the Future, where, MPs just sit down and imagine various scenarios about their country and try to see how do we reposition our country, in order to respond to some of these things. So they usually are able to, prepare themselves and get a lot of shock absorbers so that when some of these unforeseen things happen, at least their country is not found in a very deep hole. That didn't make it to, these proposed new standing orders. And then, is it Nathan, right?
Yes, Nathan here.
So Nathan, if you remember, on the after the state parliament was inaugurated, we had a challenge because the standing orders, for instance, were not made for hung parliament. We never imagined. So that's why, for instance, I'm talking about this Committee of the Future.
Okay.
We never imagined that we wake up one day and we have a divided parliament, and then we don't know who is majority, who is minority. The speaker had to make a ruling. So I was hoping that in these new standing orders, at least some of these matters will be clarified, including even imagining that someday we might wake up and have in the parliament not only the NDC and the MPP, but another maybe third party that is numerically strong as the two parties. We saw that happen in Sierra Leone in the last parliament before this year election. They woke up, their standing orders are limited because they didn't know how to deal with all these other parties that now have presence and strength in parliament. So I was hoping that some of these things would have found their way in the standing orders, even if we are not there yet, but to just imagine a day when we wake up and then we have all these things. But all in all, I think very good reforms, and I must commend them for taking the bold initiative and this time making this happen.
All right, Doc. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. That was Dr. Rashid Rahman, Executive Director of the Africa Center for Parliamentary Affairs. Very interesting points he made. So he's generally happy, and he said, well, he would have wanted to see a few other things in there, looking at some of these unknown scenarios. for example, like we are experiencing today, where there's a parliament that's almost razor thin down the middle. And I guess as we go along, parliaments will try and see how we can mix and match. But I get his point that we need to think about some of these scenarios, because one day they could be very possible. They could happen. What if one day we even wake up and you have an opposition dominating the numbers in parliament?
I must confess that Dr. Rashid Rahman played a huge part in molding myself into what I have become in terms of my understanding of parliamentary rules and procedure, because his organization expended a lot of resources to take us through training, to understand what the rules are, the procedure, and to see what happens in other jurisdictions, including Canada, Kenya, and all of that. So yes, I mean, he's a fine brain on parliamentary practice and procedure, and he's attended so many parliamentary sittings around the globe. So when he's talking, he has a great deal of understanding what parliamentary practice is generally, and what we should do here in Ghana to fine-tune our own practices and procedure to make them top-notch. So yes, his recommendations and views should be taken in that light, because with the greatest respect to everybody who has something to know or not know about Parliament, he knows his stuff. So when he speaks, we should take it with some weight. Let me also say quickly that if you look at the committee report,
Yes.
Previously there were issues with why committees hide and do their things. We
Hide in quotes.
Yeah, that's right. So that the committee on public accounts, they normally sit in public. It was spearheaded previously, and it has become the standard for public sittings of committees of the House.
Yes.
And then also about the committee on appointments. Again, they also traditionally sit in the public domain, and they do their work. Now, the committees that do not generally sit in the public domain, for one reason or the other, things are about changing, because this report that I'm reading to you has specific, recommendations that, these other committees, finance and all these committees that normally like to hide behind the cover of we are doing parliamentary work. They are saying that they should generally sit in the public domain, unless it is determined otherwise, that maybe because of ABCD sensitivity of a particular information or all of that, those matters should be discussed behind closed doors. So, for instance, the specific paragraph that deals with this says that since the inception of the Fourth Republic, the Appointments Committee has held its sittings in public. In keeping with the open governance principle, the Public Accounts Committee commenced its sittings in public in the year 2005. Since the Fifth Parliament of the Fourth Republic, the Committee of Privileges and Committee on Government Assurances have both also held their sittings in public to take evidence. In building upon the openness and transparency in parliamentary democracy, it has become necessary to consolidate the gains made in open governance process. It is therefore recommended that, unless otherwise determined by the committee, all committee sittings for the purpose of taking evidence be held in public. This proposal, which is in consonance with the goals of the strategic plan of Parliament, is to further strengthen the public involvement in the work of Parliament and Parliament citizenship engagement. In pursuance of these goals, Parliament will commence the public broadcasting of committee sittings and verbatim reporting of proceedings. So, greater transparency, and I must commend all the people who worked previously but did not get it to this stage, and particularly the Honourable Bagbin, who is now the Speaker, who is ensuring that the talk of reforming the procedures and the rules of Parliament is not only about talk, but real action is happening. And also on the committees that the minority will be chairing, the chairpersons of the following committee will be appointed from the membership of the party or parties in Parliament other than the party or parties which form the government. So the Public Accounts Committee, traditionally from the minority, So that will be maintained. Committee on Subsidiary Legislation, again, traditionally from the minority. Now, Committee on Government Assurances and Parliamentary Assurances, now minority. Budget Committee, minority will be chairing it. And Appointments Committee. Imagine that. The Appointments Committee, one of the most powerful bodies in Parliament, will now be chaired by the minority. No longer the Honorable Joe Seusu or Honorable, marking as the deputy. The Appointments Committee, chaired by the minority. Imagine that.
Yeah.
We should expect some interesting days ahead.
We should. Richard the last guy is here with me. Godfrey Akotobo. Godfrey has been quiet all morning.
Yeah, I mean, this is Sky's tutorial. So
yes, we are listening to.
I'm listening, but just I'm very, very happy that the Ghanaian Parliament shows that there is more to what they do than sometimes what we see.
Okay.
Second is they being able to see beyond the normal MPP NDC constraints that they work in.
Okay.
Because if you look at some of the new committees that Sky has mentioned, frankly, if we were to view this in the normal light of how Parliament operates, you would not think that committees like this will ever come to life. That from the next Parliament, the Appointments Committee chair is an opposition MP. That there's an extension of the Security Committee, for instance, where you must come and sit. Security couples can now be summoned to come and provide briefings properly. That the EC's appropriations conversations can be had around that, avenues to try and distress some of the committees. Also because I'm sure they would have recognized that some of the committees, and I heard an interesting voice yesterday where one MP said, every MP who goes to Parliament says he wants to join the Finance Committee.
Why?
Because there was this thinking that if you go there, there's a block there. So
That's where the pot of soup is.
so either you go to finance, or if you are not lucky, then you get energy.
Yeah.
Between those two, there you are set.
Where did it?
Where did it? So every new MP wanted to be in that group, But what they've been able to do is to deconstruct some of these committees, spread the work around so that now you can see a working towards enhancing democratic practice. Okay. It's also well and good that they set it up, but how they operate it going forward once it becomes functional is important to how our democracy will grow. But the initial steps to do these things, I am blown away that they've been able. It's taking quite a few years.
Yes,
to get these things done.
People always resist changes like this.
Yeah, because I think Sky has not been blunt enough. These are significant changes in the practice of our Parliament. And like I'm saying, because it takes powers from places, spreads it, improves transparency significantly, both within Parliament, increases perhaps some of the checks that it can now have on certain institutions. These are things that we require in our democracy. Hopefully they do not get abused or used improperly. But in the spirit that they have decided to do this, these are far-reaching democratic reforms that we have been craving for. And look, realigned committees, new committees. So there's the Committee on Security and Intelligence, Parliamentary Affairs, Human Rights. Because I always tell you that if we're to do a conversation around global topics now,
human rights.
Human rights is a key conversation that we don't really take serious in Ghana. And it might have been hidden in some corner, but now it has its own committee. Okay, a budget committee And I look at this, Sky, this almost looks like a US style
That's right.
thing.
They relied on, what happens in other countries, including the UK, Kenya, India, US, these models to actually perfect, seek to perfect, our own way.
You mentioned that because in places like the US, when you have, say, a Senate committee on defense, it's a huge deal.
Yeah.
You have Mark Zuckerberg and co being summoned to come and sit before a Senate committee and answer questions. It's a massive thing.
Yeah. So I think Parliament has done an outstanding job on this.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Just to add to what you said about particularly the appointments committee, you know that often the impression created publicly, which appears to be supported by the practices we've seen or the conducts we've seen of the chair people or the people who have chaired this particular committee in the past. Questions very legitimate that everybody expects answers to. The chairman overrules it. He just overrules it that, look, you can't ask that question, ask another question. Because that question, for instance, is taken up by a minority member of parliament. Some of these questions, you go back into the records, you realize, for instance, the Honorable Suhini Hassan, when, for instance, the finance minister was being grilled for the job, a number of issues came out about, potential, conflict of interest and matters of whether he can do the job and all of that. Some of these questions were not allowed through. But, the evidence is there for all of us to see as to whether some of these things ought to have been allowed. So imagine that a minority member is chairing the appointments committee going forward. So there will not be an opportunity to hide, under the protection of the chairman of the committee, and then a critical question that has to be asked would not be asked, or even where it is asked, it would not be allowed on the basis of what the chairman thinks of the question. I think that particular reform is also great. Godfrey, please.
Yeah, so I hope they are able to implement this properly and make progress with our democracy. That's all I will add to this.
Sky, I just want to ask. So I see that in the realigned committees, for example, there isn't one on youth, sports, and culture. Does it mean that
there's committee on youth and sports?
There's a committee on youth and sports.
Yes, on the realigned committees. There's
Okay, I did not see it in my list. Okay,
Yes.
then if that's the case, then that's fine. So I just wanted to find out what would happen to some of the committees that I thought were not there, but Godfrey has clarified.
The realigned committee. So there are existing committees which have not been touched. There are committees that have been realigned to reflect, a new way of doing things. And then there are new committees to deal with specific matters.
Okay.
And I'm just reading, for instance, the Committee on Security and Intelligence. Let me just read this out. The committee proposes for the establishment of a Committee on Security and Intelligence, the increasing role of security and intelligence agencies in modern democracies. Best practices from other democracies, including the UK and India, suggest that parliaments must have a committee empowered to monitor and exercise oversight responsibility of the intelligence establishment. The committee would also be vested with the power to access highly classified information for the purposes of exercising its mandate and to report to the House. Very, very sensitive job. But also important in the light of some of the things that we've seen the regular interior and defense committees not do in this country. And we've spoken about, for instance, the need to have civilian oversight, civilian input into the activities of the police and all the other services that our taxpayers cater to or cater for. Because, yes, they might be there for our defense, but they are supposed to be there for us and not to abuse us and not to misuse the powers that we have given them. So to have a committee of MPs outside of the committee on security,
defense and interior, I mean.
Yes, and I don't even see that committee anymore.
No. So that's what I'm saying. That so there are realigned committees.
Yes. So I am particularly happy with this one, and I will be watching closely.
Because that's your area.
This one. I'll be watching that one and the Committee on Human Rights.
Yeah, these are key.
These are very key because we've had quite a few. Otherwise, if we had this, imagine if we had this Committee on Human Rights doing that Simon misbehavior.
Yes.
Immediately, somebody is making an appearance. You are providing documents. Who signed off what? so that we, the general public, we, the citizenry, would know that there are people who are looking out for our interests. And that is my charge to the people who will make up these new committees. You are going there for our interest. Our interest. That means the general public. Do so.
Somebody sent me a text message and is asking, what about a committee for consumer protection?
Oh no, that will come under trade and,
So, of
and
course,
related matters. Just to add to what
Yes.
Godfrey said, I would have pushed for the committee responsible for national security to come under the domain of the minority,
Why?
because often they they seek to protect the use or misuse of the policing institutions to achieve executive whims.
Okay.
Do you understand? So, in cases where, for instance, when whoever was responsible for the military intruding into parliament on the day they were trying to elect a new speaker, as we speak, that matter hasn't been, investigated.
It's not been investigated.
Ideally, if that committee was alive at the time, or perhaps was formed at the time, and the authority to lead his work ceded to the minority group, you would have seen action, an invitation extended to whoever was leading the platoon of soldiers who were there on the night to come and explain why they thought it was proper to intrude into parliamentary proceedings to do whatever. You understand? The Ashaiman development. It is in the interest of the government to sometimes, cover these things, because it is not good for international review of human rights standards and all of that. You understand? So if you have the minority leading the charge in these spaces, you would see that, for instance, imagine if my good friend, an honorable member for Medina, who is respected globally for his contribution to human rights, deepening of human rights and all of that in Ghana and across Africa. Imagine if he is the chairperson of the Committee on Human Rights, and this thing happened in Ashaiman. You would have expected some robust action in Parliament to deal with this matter. But currently, the committee is in the hands of the Honorable Kennedy Ejapong. He's doing some work, I hear, and doing fairly well, asking some critical questions. But the robustness with which a minority MP would deal with the matter, it is not the same thing you would expect from a majority member of parliament. So that particular committee, looking at the committees that will be in the hands of the minority, it would seem to me that it is not one of the things that, what do you call it? Let me look at that list again. So the Public Accounts Committee on Subsidiary Committee on Government Assurances, Budget Committee and Appointments Committee. Yes, these are the ones that the minority MPs will be handling. I would respectfully submit that human rights, where it is on the pecking order, we should cede the responsibility to lead that committee with the minority. And then also the committee on, there's this other committee, the Committee on Defense and Interior.
Okay.
Which is now security and national intelligence and all of that. Also, we should look at that properly. It's, as I submitted earlier, how the governments use these institutions to create all kinds of problems. I believe that perhaps we should reconsider and see that with the minority, so that they would ensure greater accountability and ensure that all of us gets to where we want to be.